In a video I did a few months ago, I talked about my top 7 upgrades or mods to my Street Glide, and the big one I had not done yet, which was suspension. Well, I did a lot of research on 4 major brands, and I wanted to share with you what I learned and how I decided what was the best suspension for me and my Street Glide. First, I want to explain why I won't be discussing any air ride options. Now, I'm not saying air ride is bad, but I ride 9,000 to 10,000 miles a year. And a lot of that's done in group rides. And every year, someone in the group, sometime with an air ride system, has a failure. Sometimes we're able to fix it while we're there. Sometimes we're not. And that means putting the bike on the trailer. Now, I'm not saying air ride is not great. I'm not saying air ride is unreliable. I'm saying I don't want to find myself in that situation. I understand that air rides have their advantages for some people. They also add complexity. And they have, with complexity, more points of failure. And that's simply not something that I want to have to deal with. I travel a lot, sometimes out of state. I don't want to have to worry about an on-the-road repair or fix for an air ride suspension system. It's just that simple. So I won't be discussing any air ride systems today. I have about 50,000 miles on my Street Glide now, and it's all on stock suspension. And I'm sure many of you feel that suspension should be the first upgrade you do. And I may feel that way too after doing a suspension upgrade. But up until this point, I didn't really feel it was necessary. Now, over half of those 50,000 miles are probably 2-up. I rode 2-up a lot the last 5 years. Recently, my girlfriend Firecracker found her dream bike, and she's been riding it all summer, and she very rarely rides with me now. And we kind of had that plan in place. So when I was shopping for suspension, I had that in mind that I would be riding solo a lot more than I was in the past. Now, to be honest, I did not mind the stock suspension until about the last 12 months, the last 10,000 miles. So the first 40,000 miles, I didn't think it was too bad. But what I noticed in the last 10,000 miles is I'm bottoming out more often. And I haven't gained weight, so don't go there. Don't call me fat. I am fat, but you don't need to bring that up. And it just seems like in the corners that the front end wasn't sticking as good. Like we'd hit a bump and it would want to skip a little bit. It just didn't feel like it stayed planted. And if you can tell by the name of the channel, I live in the Ozarks. We have a lot of curvy roads here. And not being confident in the cornering and handling ability of your motorcycle is not a good feeling when you're riding the twisties in the Ozarks. For me, budget and brand confidence were the major factors to consider when I was deciding what brands and what suspension I was going to look at. Now, I have a budget, and my budget's not open-ended. So I'm not going to probably get the most expensive suspension, and I knew that going into this. But I wanted to look at brands that I were familiar with, that I have heard a lot about, or I know people that have, and that I had confidence in that company. For me, the 4 major brands I wanted to consider were Legends, Progressive Suspension, Fox, and Ohlins. I know there are some other great companies out there, and I looked at a few. Some were out of my price range, or some were just not as well known, and I didn't have the confidence in the brand. That doesn't mean they're bad, they just weren't an option for me. My budget was set at about $1,500 for parts. Labor's separate. Now, before we get into it, let's talk about what I have stock and what I'm replacing. So, I can't guarantee this is the same for all years, but I looked at multiple years, and I'm fairly confident when I say this, that Street Glide Specials and Road Glide Specials have a 12-inch shock on them. And like the Ultras and the Limiteds have a 13-inch shock on them. And the way you can tell the difference is by looking at the spec sheets. Street Glide Specials and Road Glide Specials have about 2.15 inches of travel, while like a Road Glide Limited or an Ultra Limited have 3 inches of travel. And that's because they have a 13-inch shock. FYI, by looking at the spec sheet, it looks like the new ST Street Glide and Road Glides have the 13-inch shock factory because they have the increased 3 inches of travel. Now, when you set your suspension up, you're supposed to set the sag. And on a 12-inch shock, that comes down to about 11.15. On a 13-inch shock, it comes down to 12. And what that is measuring from eyebolt to eyebolt the length of the shock. You should lose about 1 inch of travel on a 13-inch shock because that's about 1/3 of the 3 inches of travel. On a 12-inch shock with 2.15 inches, you're going to lose about 0.7. So you're going to be looking at about 1.4, 1.5 inches of travel on that when you're done. Now that height is measured with the bike standing straight up and you and your weight and any gear that you want to take into account on the bike. If you change the weight of the bike considerably by adding a passenger or a lot of gear, then that sag is going to change, and you should really adjust the suspension so that that sag is 1/3 of your travel with whatever gear you're going to be riding with at that time. Now, if you think about the Street Glide Special with only about 1.5 inches of travel, and the Ultras and the Limited have 2 inches of travel, that's a 1/2 inch. And a 1/2 inch may not sound like a lot, but when you're starting with 1.5 and you're going to 2 inches, that's 133%. It is a significant difference. And a lot of people can actually tell the difference in the ride between the 12-inch and the 13-inch shocks. It's very common for people to upgrade to a 13-inch shock from a 12-inch shock, assuming that they are okay with some of the changes that that presents. If you are vertically challenged and raising the bike a 1/2 inch makes it harder for you to reach the ground, maybe you're already tiptoeing, then that might not be a change you want to make. Or if you're like me and you've added a thicker touring seat to the bike versus the stock seat, you may have already raised the bike an inch or a 1/2 inch, and now you're adding another 1/2 inch on top of that. And that may not be a change you want to make as well, depending on how long your legs are. Here in the Ozarks, we find ourselves parking in gravel lots a lot. So I didn't really want to raise the bike any higher than I already have with the touring seat, because when you're trying to push that bike back in a gravel lot, you don't want your feet sliding out and then suddenly you can't reach because the bike is too tall. So for this project, my goal is to try and keep my seat height really close to where it's at now with the 12-inch shocks. The first suspension I actually looked at was Fox, because I was actually really impressed with the electronically controlled suspension that they've done in the Challenger and the Challenger Elite. And so I wanted to see what else they had to offer. I quickly discovered that the high-end systems with the remote reservoirs were already out of my budget. To stay within my budget, I was going to have to go with a series that they call the Street Performance. This would mean a fork cartridge upgrade in the front and pretty typical suspension in the rear. The downside was this would be at the top of my budget even for this setup, and it only comes with a 1-year warranty. Another con is it requires a spanner tool to adjust the suspension. And I don't know anyone around here actually running the Fox suspension that I could talk to. My only source was the internet. And while I trust Matt Laidlaw's videos, it's still just not the same as being able to talk to someone in person who's been riding it and ask them questions. The next brand I looked at was Legends. And with $900 for fork cartridges in the front and $800 for suspension in the rear, that's a little bit above my budget. But I kept them on the list in case I could stretch my budget somehow to get those if that's what I decided I really wanted in the end. Now, Legends advertises a lifetime warranty, but the one thing I couldn't find was specs on what the travel is on their suspension. Now, I have met a few people that are running the Legends suspension, and it's very popular. And all the feedback I got from those people that are running them were generally positive. So that was a good thing. But again, just a little bit high on my budget, so let's see what else we can find. The next brand I considered was Ohlin's. And looking at their prices, the only thing I could afford was their most affordable solution. Everything else was above my budget. Now I get the most affordable Ohlin solution is still probably way better than stock. But that setup was recommended for someone riding solo that can stay sub 250 pounds. That means no riding someone else on the back and not hauling a whole lot of gear when I'm camping, or I'd be right at the edge of that weight limit. And that just didn't feel like that was maybe the best choice, but I put them on the list as well. Another con with the Ohlins is I couldn't find any warranty information, just a return policy. And this suspension was also going to require a tool to adjust it. My fourth brand was Progressive Suspension, and I found that they had many shock options that were within my budget, including a setup with a monotube kit with FST technology. FST technology stands for Frequency Sensing Technology. And they have a touring shock called the 944 Ultra Touring that has FST technology in it as well. What I thought was really cool about the 944 is it is designed to provide the travel of a 13-inch shock, but with the stance of a 12-inch shock. So that meant we weren't going to raise my seat height, but I was going to get closer to 3 inches of travel than 2.15 inches of travel. That I found exciting. What made me even more excited about them? This was actually the most affordable option of all of the setups I looked at so far. So at this point, I reached out to Progressive and I talked to them about my setup, my ride height, my ride style, if I'm going to be solo, 2 people, how much gear I'm going to put on the bike, because they have different shock options for different weight limits. The customer service was great, and Ryan responded to me on every email. We went back and forth multiple times, and I never got the feeling that I was bothering them. Ryan even helped me understand why I might not want a more expensive system with those remote reservoirs on them. You see, those systems can be tuned for compression and rebound adjustment. If you change your load significantly, you should retune those or your bike's not going to ride as well. So if you're changing your weight 15, 25 pounds, you need to readjust those settings. Now, if you have a pretty consistent load, you're always solo, or you're solo with this camping gear, or you're 2 up, or you're 2 up with this camping gear, you can probably set all that up, measure that out, ride it a few times, get some settings, write them down so that when you get ready to go ride in that setup, you can dial your suspension back in based off your notes without having to, retest everything. But to be honest, it just seemed like something I wouldn't do, something I didn't want to do. Having that highly tuned system and then not highly tuning it is just going to end up with a worse ride than getting a slightly less expensive system that doesn't have as much adjustment, but that performs overall better for my style and my willingness to retune the suspension all the time. Now, Ryan took the time to explain to me what the FST technology is. And while it's patented, and I'm sure he didn't share any great secrets with me, frequency sensing technology means that when it detects that you're going down the road and the frequency of the bumps are rapid, you're on a rough surface, it builds up more pressure and the ride gets stiffer. And by doing so, you're less likely to hit a sudden bump or something else that's going to cause you to bottom out. After you go down the road and you get back on a smooth surface and the bumps are not as frequent, then the ride changes again and it gets a little more plush, a little more comfort, a little less stiff. I live on an old highway that's potholed and chip and sealed, and it's very rough for about a mile to my house. And while we have beautiful, great riding, sometimes the roads are not in the best condition. Even old Route 66, when you get on the old original highway, has some pretty rough sections where the heat has caused the pavement or the concrete to buckle. I really liked the idea of the FST technology after it was explained to me and based on the kind of road conditions and places I ride around here. So another big plus for Progressive suspension. Now the 944 rear shock is about $875 and the front monotube kit was $575, bringing me in at $1,450. But I have seen Progressive suspension on sale around Black Friday times with a discount. So that meant I was going to be able to come in under budget if I buy this at the right time and do this project in the winter. So I decided this was going to be the best setup for me. It fit my budget, actually going to come in under my budget. It provided good technology. It gave me more travel than the other systems while maintaining that 12-inch shock height look. Did I mention that it's a toolless operation to adjust the shocks and that they have a lifetime warranty? Hopefully the research I've done and the things I've shared with you today, you'll find helpful if you're shopping for suspension for your Harley Davidson Touring motorcycle. The suspension I picked was what was best for me based on my budget, my riding style, and the things that I wanted to maintain, like that seat height. I hope that helps you guys maybe make a decision or pick a suspension package from someone. If you like this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. If you do that YouTube thing, check out the content on my channel. And if you dig it, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring that bell and check all so you get notified of every video I put out. You all stay safe, keep on riding, and we'll see you in the next one.